Welcome back to the Right Wave Audio community. My name is John, and for this video, we're going to cover the entire Anthem AV processor and AV receiver range, which is now entirely HDMI 2.1 8K capable, with the introduction of the new AV processor, the AVM 78K, and receivers, the AVM 1148K, the 748K, and the 548K. And the only thing that's different as far as these model numbers is the 8K at the end. Now, the AVM 90 that was introduced earlier this year was initially launched with 8K, and so they have not appended that to the name. So as a result, what we have is a product range that starts out at around $1,900 and works its way up to $7,500 for that top-of-the-line flagship processor. And we're going to go into all these models, including the one that was launched earlier this year, and talk about what's in store for those that want to upgrade that have purchased these before 8K being introduced. Now, before we get into it, we will note that this is the third video that we've done on these Anthem processors. And this Anthem range was first introduced in November of 2020, and the Right Wave Audio community was there with our first video to say this was coming. And at the time, Anthem was touting that this is going to be an 8K HDMI 2.1 capable product range. We did learn quickly that Anthem was not going to initially launch with 8K capability, but provide it later with a board swap. And at that time, we thought that would only be around 6 months away. And now here we are in 2022, 2 years later, and we're just getting those upgrades. Now, the AVM 90 is a little special there because that did come out earlier. Now, if you go to the Anthem website, you will see clearly that they're promoting the 8K capabilities of the MRX series. And of course, this extends to the AVM series as well. And you've got this photo mock-up of the inside of a Anthem processor or receiver, showing how that video board has been updated. It's kind of a merge of a photo and some graphics here, but they drive that point through. Now, the first question I think a lot of you have is, what is Anthem doing to pre-existing owners of the AVM 70, the MRX 540, the MRX 740, and the MRX 1140? Well, they're going to have a paid upgrade program available to those owners, and it says here that you have a choice. You can either go through an authorized dealer that can complete the upgrade, or you can have your unit shipped to the Anthem factory in Ontario, Canada. Now, they do note that this is only available for the MRX 740, 1140, and AVM 70. So what they're leaving out is the 540, but they hope to announce the availability of upgrade kits for the MRX 540 by the end of 2022. Now, if you go through an authorized Anthem dealer, this is going to be $450 to you. Now, they do put a little note here that the dealer may actually charge a service fee for doing the upgrade. If you do send it to the factory and allowing 4 to 6 weeks for shipping, that's going to cost $100 more at $550 US. And that will include labor and return shipping. I imagine when you ship it out to them, that will be your cost. So that's what's available to existing owners of the most recent series. So if you're going to go out and buy this new, you could buy the AVM 70 processor. Now, that is the 8K version, and this is indicated with the 8K in the model number. And this sells for $3,999. And you can say, wait, I've been following this since the initial release back in 2020 and in November. And at that time, it was $3,499. And since then, the AVM 70 has gone up to $3,799. It went up $300 or 9%. And with this latest model, this is an additional $200 on top of that, another 5% increase. And if you compare it against that initial launch, this is a total of $500 increase or 14%. So they're definitely raising prices here. Anthem hasn't changed the styling since that 2020 release. This is exactly the same cosmetically. In fact, it doesn't look like they're changing the silk screens to add the 8K to the model number on the bottom left-hand side of the front panel or anywhere on the back. And we see the same remote being supplied as it was in the prior generations. But this is the approach that they're doing. Now the AVM 90 came out initially as 8K, and as you remember, in the pre-release, they were going to have this lag a few months from the AVM 70. That lag went more than a few months, and it went into over a year. So when it did originally get announced, that AVM 90 was $6,999. Now the price equates to a $500 increase from the initial launch, or 5%. So this is very similar to the total increase that underwent with the AVM 70. Now the AVM 90 has 19 channels of processing as opposed to the AVM 70, which is 17, and the difference is 2 additional subwoofer independent channels that the AVM 90 is capable of. But otherwise, this looks exactly like the same unit. Comparing the two, we see that the AVM 70 is a 17-channel processor versus the AVM 90 is a 19-channel processor, but otherwise look the same on the front. And on the back, really the main difference is those 2 extra subwoofer channels with balanced outputs and unbalanced outputs that you have on the AVM 90 versus the AVM 70. And after all the price increases, it is still a considerable jump in price from the AVM 70 8K up to the AVM 90. So here we're talking about $2,500 more for the AVM 90 over the 70. Now let's take a look at the entry-level receiver, the MRX 540 8K. And this is coming to market at $1,899. It is still providing 8 channels of processing, or 7.1 processing with this new model, and it's still 5 channels of amplification at 100 watts per channel for 2 channels driven. Now the first 5 channels with Anthem receivers, they're going to give you the most power output. After that, it decreases for the additional channels depending on the model, the number that you have. So the 4K model, the MRX 540, was initially launched at $1,599. The current pricing for the 4K model is $100 more from the initial launch of $1,699. And this 8K model is $200 more than that at $1,899, or a total of $300 increase from the initial launch in 2020, with an overall increase of 19%. Now when you go to the next model up, which is the MRX 740 8K, you get 4 more channels of processing, 12 channels of processing on that, and 7 channels of amplification at 140 watts into 2 channels driven. And again, that rating is for the first 5 channels. This model sells for $3,099. This represents a $200 increase over the current model, which is 4K, and a $400 increase since it was originally launched in 2020. So it's gone up 15% overall, or 7% in this latest jump to 8K. The 1140, which is the flagship of the receiver range, now in 8K, sells for $4,199 and gives you the most channels of processing, 17, and the most channels of amplification of 11. That is 11 channels of amplification at 140 watts per channel, 2 channels driven for the first 5 channels, and that is at 8 ohm rating. And like the other units, this is an increase over the 4K version currently, and so that's a $200 more, or a 5% increase. But then if you look back to the 2020 announcement that this was originally going to be $3,699, that represents a total of a $500 increase, or 14% since 2020. Now let's look at these side by side, and this is the 2020 styling as compared to the models that it replaced from 2015. I think this is a really, a nice looking unit, big upgrade in styling from the prior generation. And you can see here with this latest incarnation, they all go up about $200. And overall, they're going up between $300 and $500 from that initial launch. And this includes the AVM 90 that skipped the 4K version altogether. So these are all of them side by side, and you really see the big difference is on the pre-outs for the processor model and the number of amplified channels for the MRX receiver models. We got one picture inside here. In general, these all have toroidal transformers. They all have these red circuit boards, which is their own design. And they're all derived really from each other. So here we're showing the AVM 90, which is the 19 channels of processing unit. Let's look at the specifications now, and always we look at the speaker layout configurations first. And when we look at the processors, the main difference between the AVM 90 and 78K are the 2 channels of subwoofer. Otherwise, these are supporting 9.4.6 or 9.2.6 layouts here. And so that gives you your full 9-channel base layer with front wides, plus up to 6 height channels. And those heights can be defined as Dolby Atmos for the front, middle, or back. Could be wall heights for either the front or the back. Ceiling speakers for front, middle, or back, or wide channels for the front. So there's different ways of defining heights within the Anthem ecosystem. Now, all these models share a common manual. I don't really like that because you really don't get into the specifics configurations for each one. So they speak very generally. And so we have to kind of extract all this, what's specific for each model. Looking at this compared to the generation it replaces, the AVM 60. Now the 60 really didn't have, they were 2 channels shorter for processing, and the subwoofers were in parallel, so you didn't even have those front wide capabilities, and you didn't have 3 rows of height. So you end up with a 7.2, which was in parallel, .4 configuration. Now looking at the flagship receiver, the MRX 1140 17 channels of processing here. And so this is going to give you 2 subwoofers that are independently controlled. You do have some options there. Now the standard layout is the 7-channel base where the amplifiers go, but these are amp assignable. They do the matrixing, so you can reassign them in case you want to use external amplifiers. You can reassign those amps to another channel, such as the front wides, or one of the 3 rows of height channels can be done there. Now, when you compare this against the 1120 had the subwoofers wired in parallel and only had 2 rows of heights. The MRX 748K is very similar, but you don't have that front wide option, and you only have 2 rows of heights to work with. And then on the 720, that is also wired in parallel, so not really any difference in the layout between the 740 and the 720. That's, they're both 7.2 in parallel, .4. And then when you get to the MRX 548K, here we're talking about usually a 5 or 7 channel bass when you make a decision whether you're going to have heights or not. So if you're doing a 5 channel bass, you can have 1 row of heights, or if you're doing a 7 channel bass, then you don't have any height channels. And that's the same thing with the 520, no difference there on the layouts. One other point to note is on the 1140, 1120, 740, and 720, you had the options of bi-amping the front speakers as well as that amp matrixing flexibility that they have. These all support Dolby Atmos and DTS:X. And if you recall the early websites in 2020 that claimed that DTS:X Pro was either in the product or coming soon, and since then they dropped that. They never implemented DTS:X Pro, and we're still left wondering if that is coming. If you know of any further details of where the status stands on that, that would be helpful to the Ripewave audio community. Now, they've never made any claims for Aural 3D, and they have since wrote back and said that it is really a niche format with limited content, and they don't plan on adding it, is the way I recall some of the discussions through chats and email responses with customers. They all have a 1/4-inch headphone jack. They do not put an AM/FM tuner in any of the new models, although they had that on some of the old ones. They're all removable power cords on these. None of them have an outlet on the back, and you do have to decide whether you're going to need the 110 volt or the 220 volt version based off the model that you buy from the factory. This is not auto selection or manual selection in the field. Now, looking at some of the other formats, they all support IMAX and Enhance and Dolby Vision. For calibration, they're using their own calibration software, which is the updated version of ARC, which is ARC Genesis, and it's able to do bass management, all included with the price. And it does support up to 4 profiles, which is very nice. So if you want to try different configurations and compare them A/B, or you use a different profile for different types of content, you have that capability. Now, looking at the DACS here, now we do know that Anthem made a switch from their initial launch from the AKM chips to ESS to address supply issues caused by the AKM factory fire. So now they've moved to ESS Sabre chips, which of course is a very respectable chip, and some feel is actually better than the AKM, but we'll let you decide. We don't know exactly which model of ES it's moved for the 8K models, but the AVM 90 we understand is the ES 9038 Pro, and that has very respectable outputs, signal to noise of 132 and supporting DSD, etc. But when it comes down to what the Anthem actually makes use of from those DACs, this results in a 115 dB signal to noise and negative 102 dB THD, and a PCM decoding of 24192, not the full 768 that the chips have the capability for, and they do not have DSD support, which we're disappointed that they don't. Now, we realize this isn't necessarily a future format, but a lot of us have this, including myself, with the Super Audio multi-channel disc that I have, particularly that I want to make use of. So it really does hold me back from moving forward with an Anthem platform by not having that. And that's just my own decision there, although we'd like to get one of these in-house to compare, right? The audio quality. I mean, I guess I could be swayed if this audio quality was that much more superior. I could give up on a few features. And as you move to the lower ends of the product range, you don't have quite as good of signal to noise ratio, let's say on the AVM 70 or any of the receivers there. They're all claiming 110 decibels versus 115. A THD of negative 100 seems to be the norm for them. but they're all doing the processing of PCM at 24,192, so no difference there. And then this is a slight improvement in THD over the prior generation, but otherwise quite consistent. And if you know more about the models of ACAM chips used in these, that would be useful for us as well. Now, inputs and outputs, these are all 7 HDMI inputs, 3 outputs, except for when you move to the older generation, which only had 2 outputs, or you get down to the MRX 520, which also only has 2 outputs. Now, they all give you 2 coaxial and 3 optical inputs, as well as 1 optical output for digital signals. There's no AES, EBU, or AOIP inputs. And when it comes to outputs, the processors all give you balanced output, either 15.4 or 15.2, respectively there. And this is an improvement over the 60, which was 11.1. Looking at the amplifiers, now, of course, on the processors, you do have the matching unbalanced connections. And for the MRX 1140 receivers on down, it's unbalanced outputs only, starting at 15.2 for the 1140 and working its way down to 7.2 for the 540 8K. Now, none of these are giving you a balanced input, and that's another thing we wish these units included, because we do have our turntable on a balanced connection some distance from where this processor would be. So another reason why we might go to a different model, a different brand, at least for our own usage. They all give you 5 analog inputs. Now, in the case of the AVM 90 and the 78K, that 5th one is actually your moving magnet phono input. So it's really 4 plus the phono on those models. None of these give you composite legacy video on those. So if you're looking for those, you're not going to get them from Anthem. Now, a little more detail on the HDMI 2.1 support that's getting added here. And this is the big push Anthem's made. Even back in 2020, they were touting this, and they were coming in just after the heels of Denon, Marantz, and Yamaha, who were the first to market with HDMI 2.1, and they said, and they were going to come with their new generation process also having it, and this is why a lot of people were all excited about it. And of course, I know a lot of you write in, who cares? I think that's a lot of everybody's opinion is who cares. But I'm going to, just to step back for a second here. I buy these things for the long haul. I like to see that it's in there. And, another thing is 2.1 has been out there for a long time. And I think a lot of us were ingrained into the thought process of, getting burned with all these HDMI increases over the years up until 2.1. And we were always forced to go to a new receiver or a new processor. And in this case, there's not a compelling reason to make the jump, but there's still that feeling like, do I really want to lock myself in to something that is built off a standard that now is over 5 years old? So I put it to you that way. Even if there isn't a functional reason, it's comforting to know that you're at the latest thing. And there's probably not anything that's going to replace HDMI 2.1 in the near future. So with that said, for the models that do support it here, you get 4K 120, 8K 60 on the frame rate. Now they're only doing this at 18.2 gigabit per second. Now we've seen other implementations that went up to 40 gigabits per second. It's kind of the norm there. I think that's what Denon and Marantz are doing. The standard actually goes up to 48 gigabits per second. I've yet to see one officially announce support for that. They're all giving you an eARC output, and as far as other 2.1 features, variable refresh rates, quick media switching, quick frame transport, auto low latency mode. These are all included. This has kind of come to be expected. They all support hybrid log gamma. So did the previous generation. They all support HDR10 Plus and HDR. They all support Dolby Vision and IMAX Enhance, except for when you go back to that prior generation, then they're not supporting IMAX Enhance or HDR10 Plus or any of the 2.1 features. The other thing that you'll get is for the copy protection HDCP, it's at 2.3 versus 2.2 of the prior generation. As far as networking, we have Ethernet on board, we have Wi-Fi, we have Bluetooth in, but not Bluetooth out. So Bluetooth out is helpful if you wanted to have Bluetooth enabled headphones connected. This is not yet supported. And of course, you don't have any of the fancy networking standards that you might see in a Storm or a JBL Synthesis product. As far as voice control, now I believe the prior generation supported Alexa. On the newer products, we don't see any voice control being claimed on the Anthem product. They do support for integration over Ethernet, over infrared wired, 232 ports. So this is all supported. They have triggers, so you're getting 3 outputs that are triggered now versus 1 as in the past. So that's an increase. And it seems to support all the major integration platforms. Now, we don't really know from the prior generation, but assume that they had some. As far as streaming ecosystem, AirPlay, AirPlay 2, Chromecast, all supported. Roon, I thought they would have had Roon ready by now, or Roon tested, one or the other, because they've announced it since 2020. Now, they did come out sometime between the initial launch and now with Spotify Connect support. So they did add that from the original It's Coming. So, but why haven't they addressed Roon support? That's important to some of us. DTS PlayFi has been dropped from their platform, and this is what you have for streaming ecosystems. Internet streaming, they're not making any claims here. So if you know have the product and know they support some of these, let us know. The remotes are all the same. In fact, this is the remote from the prior generation product. They have done no work on the remote as far as a physical remote. In fact, this remote resembles some others you might find for other products. So we've seen the same remote on Samsung TVs and brand, generic remotes that you can buy on Amazon. So nothing special there on the remote department. On the physical size, they're really consistent here. The new models are all 6 inches high, 152 millimeters, 14.5 inches deep, or 364 millimeters, and 17 inches wide, 422 millimeters. And this differs only slightly from the prior generation. In fact, I just think it's a tad less wide, and otherwise it's the same. The depth of some of the older receivers are a 1/4 inch deeper, so close enough. Weights range here, not a lot of variety here. Like the processors are 21.1 pounds, 10.1 kilograms. The 1140 flagship, that's the heaviest unit. That's for a receiver. That's 33.6 pounds, 15.2 kilograms. The 520 entry level, so a lot less of amplifiers. So we're at 5 amplifiers versus 11. Takes you down to 28.2 pounds, 12.8 kilograms. Now, power consumption, of course, the processors use less because they don't have amplifiers. That's only 60 watts. And the receivers range from 365 watts for the 520 or 540, 485 watts for the 740, and 570 watts for the 1140 8K. They all use 0.3 watts in standby mode. And these are all made in Vietnam with a 3-year warranty. looking at the software aspects here, they have a web interface that you can connect to this over the Ethernet port, which is really nice. You can sit back and use that, maybe use Wi-Fi to connect to it, and be able to make your configurations and do your general work. And Anthem Arc Genesis is available through this web interface as well. And they've got Mac and Windows versions available. Now they do have a remote app, which is in public beta early access now, and they're advertising this on their website. So here you can do remote control for zones 1 and 2. You can access all the web user interfaces through the mobile app, and you can turn ARC on and off, and it's available for iOS and Android-based mobile devices. So that covers it for Anthem. So what are your thoughts here? I know a lot of you think of Anthem as your step up from Marantz and Denon, and that along with Arcam, we usually see one or the other, but people talk about upgrading their Marantz and Denon too. But now the prices of Denon and Marantz have gone up, getting closer to Anthem and Arcam. You know, is that going to make it even more compelling to jump over to Anthem or Arcam? Or are you still compelled by the number of sheer features and support that is in Denon and Marantz, and you're willing to give up maybe some sound quality advantages that may be garnered from Anthem and Arcam? And the other thing to note is with Denon and Marantz now having Direct Live, does that also sway you maybe back into the Denon and Marantz camp? That feedback would be useful to the RipeWave audio community. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this community. And if you want to take it to the next level, consider being a Patreon by going to www.patreon.com/RipeWave. That additional support would be very appreciated. But regardless, hit that bell icon so you'll be notified for the next video. And until then, keep evolving your audio experience.